Well, I wanted to talk about the climate because, folks, it's bad. It's very bad. On this show, we recently discussed the freezing temperatures in Texas, for example. Here in California, we're constantly ravaged by massive wildfires, and meanwhile, the polar ice caps are melting at a rate that is much, much faster than even the worst doomsday scenarios had anticipated, which is only going to exacerbate all of this. But luckily, we have a guy in the White House who believes in freaking science now. The science, folks, you gotta believe it. So one of the first things Joe Biden did when he got into office was to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. Great. And the guy he put in charge of his administration's climate policy is a familiar face to those of us who remember the early aughts. That's right. It's the windsurfing New England Patriots logo himself, John Kerry. That's right. John Kerry is Joe Biden's special presidential envoy for climate. Now, John Kerry is a smart man. He believes the science. Surely, he understands that we need bold, decisive action by the government to spend billions, if not trillions of dollars to fundamentally reorganize our society in order to save the planet.
Where do you see financing being secured from? Because ESG investing has been hot. Do you think there's the capital to get this done, sir?
Yes, there is the capital. Of course, there's the capital. There's some $51 trillion of capital, in the marketplace now, looking for places to go. It's one of the reasons why SPACs have become so popular, a quick way to market with capital in these areas. And that's ESG is in every boardroom today. People are discussing both ESG and SDGs as investing, but they're also beginning to really focus in, as you see with Hank Paulson's new fund, on specific climate-related investment, of which there are enormous opportunities out there.
SPACs, ESGs, SDGs, former Bush Secretary of Treasury and former Goldman Sachs CEO Hank Paulson has a fund for green stuff. I don't know about you guys, but that all sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook to me. I mean, Kerry said it right there in his answer. There are $51 trillion in cash just sitting there waiting to be spent. Maybe if instead of begging the Hank Paulsons of the world to invest some of that into green tech, I don't know, maybe the government could see some of that cash and decide what to do with it democratically. But no, the only solution that the good science-loving liberals can come up with is to beg billionaires to direct their capital towards green tech. Enter Bill Gates. Bill Gates just released a book called How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, The Solutions We Have and the Breakthroughs We Need. I reckon you will not receive that one if you join the Verso Book Club. So Bill Gates has spent the last few weeks on a press tour promoting his book and talking about his solution to the climate problem. And here's a hint. He believes that the private sector is the key to solving this.
But can the problem be solved if big businesses and Microsoft and Apple and Google and others have announced very ambitious plans, but they're all idiosyncratic? I mean, they're doing it on their own. Can it work if everybody's doing it on their own? Or does it effectively require regulation and laws?
Over time, you'll have regulations that will drive the market for green products. But even before it gets to the stage of having those regulations, having enlightened companies create markets for some of the earlier stage green products like green steel or green cement, that will be super important. Having the tech companies figure out how to run their data centers 24 hours a day without ever using any coal-based generation, that will drive the market for storage products.
So we wouldn't want icky government regulation. We want enlightened companies creating markets. But wait, there's more. Bill Gates is not doing this on his own. He's inviting his other billionaire friends to the climate party.
Gates has already invested $2 billion of his own money on new green technologies and plans to spend several billion more. In 2016, he also recruited Jeff Bezos, Mike Bloomberg, and nearly 24 other wealthy investors to back a $1 billion fund called Breakthrough Energy Ventures, making long-term, often risky investments in promising technologies.
Isn't that cute? I mean, they should make a montage out of that. Just Bill Gates going down his list of billionaire friends and calling them up and asking, are you in or are you out? But folks, I hate to break it to you. The billionaires, They're not going to save us. In fact, when it comes to climate change, it is the billionaires themselves who are the problem.
Well, they make up just 1% of the world's population, but produce more pollution than the poorest 50%. The rich are racing through Earth's finite carbon budget, which scientists warn could run out within a decade. That's the warning of a new report from Oxfam.
That's right. According to Oxfam, the global 1%, i.e. billionaires like Bill Gates and his friends, are responsible for twice as many emissions as the lower half of the planet, meaning that a small group of rich assholes emit twice as much as 3 billion people. Moreover, if we look at the means of production, according to a report, just 100 companies have been the source of more than 70% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions since 1988. So don't be fooled by the PR that these billionaires are feeding us. To the extent that they care about the climate, they want to fix it in a way that protects their own class privilege. Often, their efforts are largely bullshit. Take the case of Richard Branson, aka Barack Obama's best friend. Back in 2006, Richard Branson pledged to dedicate all of the profits from Virgin Air and rail interests over a span of 10 years to combat climate change. Wow, that is crazy. All of his company's profits for a decade. I mean, that sounds like a remarkable pledge. And it was. It amounted to $3 billion. Well, I guess Sir Richard Branson thought that he could make that announcement and people would eventually forget about it. He didn't count on pesky Naomi Klein following up on that 8 years later.
So yeah, I go after Richard Branson because I think he's a really interesting case study. I mean, people probably forget this by now, but in 2006, he made this very splashy announcement in New York at the Clinton Global Initiative that he was going to divert all of his profits from his airlines and his trains and other parts of his empire that were burning carbon and fueling the climate crisis, that he was going to divert them into developing a form of fuel that didn't have, that didn't emit carbon, and other technologies that would solve the climate crisis. And he made this commitment that it would be $3 billion in the next decade. And so, we're almost out of time. We're 8 years into the pledge, and he's nowhere close. His finances are pretty opaque. It's hard to get a straight answer out of him. I failed. I did get an answer out of him, but it wasn't a straight one. But he's, maybe 300 million. It's not even close to to 3 billion.
Womp, womp. You see, whenever you see a billionaire doing something that seems good, we should be very, very suspicious of it. They only want to do good in a way that maintains their own power. For example, Bill Gates famously created something called the Giving Pledge back in 2010. This is where he pledged to give nearly all of his wealth away and signed up a bunch of other billionaires like Warren Buffett and others to join. Well, Bill Gates is somehow richer today than when he said he was going to give all his money away. So climate change is an existential threat. It's going to require a degree of global cooperation that we've really never seen before. And it's going to require a degree of international solidarity that is sorely missing right now. But we have to stop seeing the rich as allies in that fight. They are not. They are our enemies. As Lee Phillips points out, from 1990 to 2009, labor's share of national income declined in 26 out of 30 developed economies, according to the OECD. Overall, across advanced economies, labor's share dropped from 66.1% to 61.7%. And as poor as many people are in the developing world, the gap between them and the workers of the global north is less than the gap between the latter and the 1%. That is to say, us ordinary folks in the supposed rich countries are closer in wealth and have far more in common with third world workers than we do with our own bosses. In other words, in order to fight the climate crisis, we have to fight the class war. We cannot fight each other. The rich have all the money needed to bear the cost of transitioning to a green economy, and they are the most responsible for the destruction of the planet. This idea of green capitalism is a bunch of nonsense. The logic of profit will always dictate more and more extraction. So no to rich philanthropy. The rich need to pay higher taxes. That would be a good start.
This is my first time at Davos, and I find it quite a bewildering experience, to be honest. I mean, 1,500 private jets have flown in here to hear Sir David Attenborough speak about, how we're wrecking the planet. And I mean, I hear people talk in the language of participation and justice and equality and transparency. But then, I mean, almost no one raises the real issue of tax avoidance, right? And of the rich just not paying their fair share. I mean, it feels like I'm at a firefighters conference and no one's allowed to speak about water. I mean, this is not rocket science. I mean, we can talk for a very long time about all these stupid philanthropy schemes. We can invite Bono once more, but come on, we got to be talking about taxes. Yeah, exactly. That's it, taxes, taxes, taxes. All the rest is bullshit, in my opinion.
Taxes, taxes, taxes. But the rich, they don't want to pay taxes. They talk a big game about investing billions of their own money in green tech. But when the question turns to taxes, those same billionaires get a little bit more skittish.
Bill Gates saying yesterday that he supports higher taxes for the wealthy, but not through a wealth tax.
I've paid over $10 billion in taxes. I paid more than anyone in taxes. But I'm glad to have paid, if I'd had to pay $20 billion, it's fine. But when you say I should pay $100 billion, okay, then I'm starting to do a little math about what I have left over. Sorry, I'm just kidding.
Ha ha ha, isn't he funny? Now, the thorny question is, how do we get the rich to pay taxes? I mean, they're so rich, which means they're very powerful. Powerful enough that powerful politicians like John Kerry are reduced to begging them to invest in stuff we need. This is despite the fact that taxing the rich is one of the most popular policies around. Support for raising taxes is widespread, according to a new poll, which found that 76% of registered voters, including a majority of Republicans, want the wealthiest Americans to pay more. So even though taxing the rich is popular, in actual fact, we still can't do it. So how do we change that balance of power between the uber rich and regular working folk? If only there was something. Oh, I know, labor unions. We've said it before on this very program, but labor unions are the only way to challenge the power of the capitalist class. There just ain't no other way. Therefore, it is crucial that the struggle for labor power is tied inextricably to the struggle for the environment. Much has been made about the fact that the AFL-CIO supported things like the Keystone XL pipeline in the name of jobs. This is disappointing, but that is somewhat understandable given the weakness of the labor movement in America today. But this was not always the case. Back in the 60s and 70s, when labor was stronger, labor was at the forefront of the environmental movement. One of the leaders of that effort was a guy named Tony Mazzocchi. He was the vice president of the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers International Union. He was no one's idea of like a hippie, hacky-sacking tree lover, but watch how he links the struggle of workers to environmental justice.
Anthony Mazzocchi is vice president of the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union in the United States. He was a pioneer in the fight against chemical hazards in the workplace, and for many years was a lone voice in his effort to alert society to the dangers faced by workers.
You could build a brand new plant today, have it designed by the finest engineers, make it pollution-proof. In a few months or a few years, that plant will be spitting out and belching out what an old plant belches out. Because the crucial fact is that no employer will do what's necessary to maintain a plant. And that's keep it labor intensive, to maintain it, by maintaining the equipment and keeping sufficient operating personnel on. And that's the secret. Every worker can tell that things were better a while ago because we had more people doing the type of things that are necessary to maintain these facilities. An oil refinery was safer 25 years ago simply because that refinery was brought down each year for 6 to 8 weeks for maintenance. Today, they're kept on stream 2, 3 years until they either break down or they have to really turn them down to repair them. But in the meantime, they're emitting very caustic substances and very polluting substances, which of course find their way through the community. The community subsidized that operation by virtue of the fact that they have increased morbidity and mortality in the community. Those death certificates are a subsidy for industry.
Those death certificates are a subsidy for industry. Now, Mazzocchi and his union were the driving force behind the creation of the Occupational Health and Safety Administration, better known as OSHA, which protected workers from the toxic chemicals at their workplace, amongst other things. In his profile of Mazzocchi, Conor Kilpatrick writes in Jacobin, Quote, as Mazaki saw it, those chemicals that poisoned his union's rank and file eventually make their way into communities outside through the air, soil, and waterways. The factory was therefore the demon core of the environmental crisis. But as a socialist, Mazaki also knew the job site was a place in which workers potentially had vast powers even under capitalism. It was the workers in these industries who taught me that there was a systematic conflict between profits and health. When you start thinking that, when you start to interfere with the forces of production, you're going to the heart of the beast. If we want to fight the climate crisis, we need to fight the class war. We're not going to solve it through personal responsibility, but through class interests. And if we're going to avoid a climate catastrophe, we need to move beyond capitalism. As Paris Marx writes in Jacobin, green capitalism will never facilitate the scale of action that is necessary to keep warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius or even 2 degrees Celsius because it refuses to take on the powerful people in industries that are fueling the climate crisis in the first place. It continues to ensure the benefits flow to the top while hollowing out the middle class and producing climate narratives that shift the burden of responsibility onto those who have little power to make the necessary changes, the public, if not the global poor. The kind of climate action we need requires taking on the wealthy and organizing around a vision for a different kind of society. And that means not just making the rich pay higher taxes, but actively dismantling the economic structures that facilitate their wealth accumulation, treat the planet as an unlimited bounty of free raw materials, and generate all the emissions warming the planet.
That last part was just so on point. And the thing that, God, I had so many thoughts when you were talking, especially about the personal responsibility angle, which of course I'm going to get to during my Decode segment today. But all of the onus that we've seen so far has been placed on individuals, and that's been going on for years and years now. And as you've mentioned, as I've mentioned, there's no way that you changing your personal habits is going to make up for the amount of pollution that's put out there by these top 100 businesses that are polluting the planet. So I love that you included that statistic. Rich philanthropy is not ever really philanthropy. There are three reasons why rich people engage in philanthropy. Number one, it's tax breaks. They want to save on their taxes. Number two is an effort to influence a department in a university, which is something that the Koch brothers have done. They'll donate a ton of money to universities, but it's never to just enhance education. They focus on science departments, and it's their way of censoring or trying to bog down any actual factual climate science. And then, of course, positive PR. And we see this with them, you know, donating their money to various foundations, art galleries, things, museums, things like that, just for positive PR. But you're right. All of this stuff is irrelevant if you have people power. And it's important as we continue having conversations about renewable energies to ensure that we push for a non-privatized model, which is why I love like the last part of your Decode, Nando, because I don't want ExxonMobil or any of these other fossil fuel companies to tout their new investments in renewable energies. They should not be leading the way, because they should not own the energy. I mean, we saw what happened with a privatized, deregulated model in Texas, and I'm terrified that we're just going to shift over to the renewable energy version of that. And that might be better for the environment, but it's certainly not better for the people, especially since, you know, these private companies will do whatever it takes to cut costs and increase their profits, which means literally leaving you out in the cold if they have to. Yeah.
I mean, the sort of famous choice, right? Socialism or barbarism is going to be very stark once the climate crisis becomes like, I mean, it's already really, really bad even today, but like when it becomes like a, you know, real like an existential threat to the vast majority of humans, it's going to be a choice. Like, do we want like eco-fascism or some form of eco-socialism? They're going to choose one or the other. It's the only two choices there are, because it's going to be so bad that something drastic is going to happen. And, you know, the people in power will make drastic decisions to like protect their own status and protect their own livelihood. Like they want to live in a place that has, you know, unless they, you know, like, did you see this viral story that went out this week about like they're building a hotel in outer space and it's going to be ready by 2027? Yeah, like they're going to build, you know, like they might do that. They're planning for that. Like, you know, that's why Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and all these people are obsessed with that, because I think they feel on some level that they gotta get the hell out of Dodge. Yeah, there it is. That's what it's going to look like in 2027. World's first space hotel. Yeah, looks great, doesn't it? Meanwhile, like, the world is burning, right? So, you know, something's going to happen, and this kind of the status quo of neoliberal capitalism, whatever we want to call it, like, it's going to destroy the planet if it just kind of keeps going. We'll try, and it's something drastic will have to change, and it just depends on who has the power when that change has to happen. And so if we don't build labor power, which is the only way to have people power, the only way to have people power is through labor power. If we don't do that, we are going to be living in a world like in sort of like eco-fascist state in which, like, the rich control everything. They live in like these kind of sanctuaries, right? Green sanctuaries, and everyone else just kind of suffers the ravages of climate and are just kind of kept out and maintained in the most bare minimum way. You know, like every single science fiction dystopia. So yeah, I mean, we really that's why all these discussions that we have about labor, like why like we focused on the Bessemer story so early, is because like the Bessemer story really strikes at the heart of the system, right? It's Amazon. Like they're going to be the biggest employer in America in like the next 1 or 2 years. Like, just that is the heart of the system. Like that is symbolically so important. Like if these people win, these like, and this isn't like people in a warehouse in New York or whatever, like a much more kind of unionized state where there's much. This is in Bessemer, Alabama. This is poor. This is a right to work state. This is, you know, in the deep South. The last, like, it's a symbolic victory that you can imagine maybe possibly being the seeds of something more, of something that can inspire people all around the country and all around the world to reverse the trends that we've seen for 4 decades of neoliberalism. Like, we just have to do it in some way, and you have to find these embers where you can find them and try to blow a little air into them so that they can burst into a large flame. And if that flame gets big enough, we've seen in the past that the expansion can be very rapid. You know, like like the militancy of the labor movement and the size of it, like even in over 100 years ago, 200 years ago, like at certain points would like spread like wildfire. So we need to find those embers and we need to blow on them like a little, just a light, you know, help, you know, push them along, and then maybe they can form a giant flame.
Yeah, you're right. And as Jane McAlevey says, wins matter. You know, wins motivate people, they inspire people. And I think you're absolutely right in what you're saying, which reminds me, you know, in your ProAct segment that you did last week, you mentioned, you know, some of the lip service that Biden gave to labor during his campaigning, but he hadn't at that point said a single word about the effort to unionize in Bessemer. Yeah. After that, he actually did release a video on social media. And I mean, it was strong. What he was saying was strong. And if I believed him, I would probably celebrate it a little more. But I don't know. Maybe I'm being unfair. Do you think it's just lip service, or?
I'm sure. I mean, it doesn't. The point is, it doesn't matter. Doesn't even matter. You know, it doesn't matter. He said it. You know, and it's true that it is true that, like, whether he's full of shit or not, it doesn't really matter. Like, he did give a public show of support, which I reckon will give a lot of people in Bessemer like the president. He's the president of the United States. You know what I mean? It's kind of like. And it is true that Biden's statement was probably the first time a president weighed in on a specific labor battle in like 50 years, like since maybe the Truman administration or something. Like, it's like people have debated, like, but like certainly in many, many, many decades. And again, it's not because Biden is a uniquely good guy. It's not that he's like intrinsically better than someone like Barack Obama, who said nothing about any specific labor fight, that he then produced a documentary about it after he was president and didn't do anything while he was president. But that's a whole nother story. It's because, you know, we talk about how the left doesn't have much power, but it has more power than it did in 2008. Now it is more aware of itself. It is more muscular and self-confident, there is more media, there is more left media. All these things are true, and they have a little bit of an effect. And this is just a sign of the changing times, of the fact that the president of the United States weighed in on this. Like, he felt he had to. It's not because he wanted to, because he felt he had to. And it doesn't matter what's in his heart or whether he's sincere or not. The fact is he did it. So
yeah, it's a good point.